dive bombers screamed down through 40,000 feet of Pacific sky. Captain Thaddeus Lowell stood on the flight deck of USS Enterprise, binoculars pressed against his weathered face. 57 years old, grey at the temples, hands steady, despite everything riding on the next 5 minutes. 40 miles to the north, invisible beyond the curve of the Earth, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers steamed in perfect formation. Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, the pride of the Imperial Navy. The same carriers that had turned Pearl Harbor into a graveyard 6 months ago. The radio crackled. Scratch 1, flat top. Lowell's breath caught. Scratch 2. His knuckles whitened on the binoculars. Scratch 3. The wind carried smoke from the horizon, black columns rising into the morning sun. June 4th, 1942. 10:22 in the morning. The exact time. The exact place. The exact result he had drawn on a map 3 weeks ago in Admiral Nimitz's office. A hand gripped his shoulder. Admiral Randolph Kimmel, 59 years old. Civilian clothes now, no uniform, no stars. Fired, disgraced, blamed for Pearl Harbor. "You called it Thad," Kimmel said quietly. Lowell lowered the binoculars. His eyes were wet. "Not soon enough, sir." Because 18 months earlier he had been right about something else, something nobody wanted to hear, something that had cost American lives because the men who mattered called him a coward, a defeatist, a man who had gone native in Tokyo and lost his nerve. This is the story of the man who predicted Pearl Harbor, who predicted the Philippines would fall, who predicted Midway would decide the war, and who was called insane, un-American, and worse. Until it was too late. And just in time. Tokyo, September 1936. Rain drummed against the windows of the Imperial Navy Ministry building. Captain Thaddeus Lowell sat in the observation gallery, notebook open on his lap, watching Japanese naval officers conduct a tactical exercise on the operations floor below. 51 years old, naval intelligence, 3rd tour in Japan, 15 years studying the language. He could read kanji characters faster than most ensigns could read English. On the floor below, miniature ship models moved across a painted ocean. 6 aircraft carriers positioned in a tight formation. An admiral barked orders. The carriers advanced together. Radio silence. Dawn approach. Sudden strike. Lowell wrote, "Carrier strike doctrine. 6-ship formation. Coordinated attack. Dawn timing. No warning." The American naval attaché beside him yawned. "Theater Lowell. They'll never pull it off in actual combat." Lowell didn't respond. He watched the carriers wheel into attack position, watched the launch sequence, watched how they had practiced this maneuver until it flowed like water. After the exercise, Lowell walked through the rain to a bookstore in Ginza. Military section, 3rd floor. He bought every manual he could find on carrier operations, torpedo tactics, dive bombing procedures, fleet coordination under radio silence. That night in his small apartment overlooking Tokyo Bay, he read until dawn and realized something that made his blood run cold. Japan wasn't building a defensive navy. They were building an offensive weapon unlike anything the world had seen. He wrote a 20-page report, sent it to Washington. Subject line, "Japanese carrier strike capability, immediate threat assessment." The response came 3 weeks later. Captain Lowell overestimates Oriental capability. Japanese naval power remains defensive in nature. No evidence supports claim of coordinated multi-carrier offensive doctrine. Captain Lowell's extended assignment in Tokyo may have compromised his objectivity. Recommend rotation to domestic posting. Midterm translation. You've gone native. You're seeing threats that don't exist. Come home. Lowell read the cable in his office, folded it carefully, filed it away, and kept watching. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, November 1940, 4 years later. Lowell stood at the window of Station Hypo, the Navy's cryptographic intelligence unit, watching rain sweep across the harbor. The same rain that had fallen in Tokyo, different ocean, same sense of coming storm. He had been proven right about nothing, proven wrong about nothing, simply ignored, rotated home, Assigned to signals intelligence, a desk job, a place to finish out his career quietly, except the signals weren't quiet anymore. Lieutenant Cornelius Rochefort, 35 years old, brilliant, with codes, knocked on the doorframe. "Sir, you should see this." Lowell turned. Rochefort held a stack of intercept transcripts, Japanese naval communications, encrypted, but patterns emerged even through the cipher. 6 carriers, Rochefort said, disappeared from radio traffic, complete silence for the past 72 hours, same 6 that always operate together: Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, Shokaku, Zuikaku. Lowell took the transcripts, scanned the analysis, felt the same cold certainty he had felt in Tokyo 4 years ago. "The formation I saw in Tokyo," he said quietly. "They're moving." "Where?" "I don't know. But when 6 carriers go silent together, they're either in port or preparing to strike." He wrote another report, sent it up the chain. Subject: Japanese Carrier Movement Threat Assessment. Admiral Kimmel called him in personally. 57 years old then, commander of the Pacific Fleet, 4 stars, a good man, a careful man. "Washington thinks you're crying wolf, Thad." "I know, sir." "They say you've been predicting Japanese aggression since 1936. Nothing's happened." Yet. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, studied Lowell, career intelligence officer, impeccable record, spoke Japanese like a native, understood the culture, but paranoid maybe. Washington certainly thought so. "What do you think they're planning?" "I don't know, sir, but 6 carriers don't disappear by accident. If they're moving as a unit under radio silence, they're practicing something. And they've been practicing dawn carrier strikes since I watched them in Tokyo." "Against what target?" "The only targets worth risking 6 carriers for: Pearl Harbor, Philippines, maybe Singapore." Kimmel was quiet for a long moment. "I'll increase patrols, beef up reconnaissance, but Thad, if you're wrong about this..." "I'm not wrong, sir, I'm just early." November 26, 1941. Lowell worked late. Station Hypo hummed with activity. Code breakers hunched over worksheets. Radio operators monitored frequencies. Rochefort coordinated it all, brilliant and tireless. Lowell stared at the map on his wall. Pacific Ocean. Japanese-controlled territory marked in red. American positions in blue. The math was simple and terrifying. If you wanted to cripple American naval power in one blow, you hit Pearl Harbor. Battleship Row. 8 battleships lined up like targets in a shooting gallery. The Pacific Fleet's backbone. If you wanted to seize the Philippines and cut off American power projection in Asia, you hit Clark Field, destroy the bombers on the ground. Land troops, take Manila. If you wanted to do both, you did them simultaneously. Dawn attacks, no warning, coordinated strikes across thousands of miles of ocean. Exactly like the exercises he had watched in Tokyo in 1936. He typed the memo himself. 2 pages, single-spaced, every word chosen with care. To Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, from Captain T. Lowell Station, Hypo Intelligence, subject imminent Japanese carrier strike. Analysis of communications traffic patterns indicates Japanese carrier strike force, 6 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, Shokaku. Zuikaku has departed home waters under radio silence. Based on 15 years of studying Japanese naval doctrine, I assess the following target: Pearl Harbor, naval installations, primary objective, Battleship Row. Secondary targets, Clark Field, Philippines, and British Singapore. Timing attack will occur within 14 days of this memo. Most likely window December 6th to 8th, 1941. Method: dawn attack, torpedo bombers against battleships, dive bombers against airfields, fighter escort, 2-wave assault, no declaration of war prior to attack. Recommendation: immediate dispersal of Pacific Fleet, increased air patrols, particularly northwest quadrant. Alert all commands, assume attack imminent. Respectfully, T. Lowell, Captain USN. He sealed it, walked it to Kimmel's office personally, handed it to the aide. "The Admiral needs to see this tonight." The aide glanced at the subject line, looked at Lowell like he was crazy. "Sir, it's nearly midnight." "Wake him." Kimmel read it at breakfast the next morning, called Lowell in. "You're certain about this?" As certain as I can be without breaking their codes completely, sir. Kimmel forwarded it to Washington, to the War Department, to Army Intelligence in the Philippines. General Augustus Blackwell, commanding Army forces in the Philippines, read it in his office in Manila, 57 years old, West Point, career soldier. He had never met Lowell, didn't know him, didn't care. He wrote one sentence in reply. Captain Lowell has lost his mind. The Japanese couldn't organize a competent attack if we gave them a map. Washington's response was more diplomatic, but equally dismissive. No intelligence supports claim of imminent Japanese attack. Captain Lowell's assessment reflects pattern of alarmist reporting, recommend continued observation but no change to fleet posture. Kimmel called Lowell back in. They're not buying it, Thad. I know, sir. You understand if this is wrong, your career is over. They'll call you the boy who cried wolf. You'll never make flag rank. You'll be lucky to avoid court-martial for causing a panic. And if I'm right, sir, Kimmel had no answer for that. December 7th, 1941, 7:55 a.m. Lowell sat at his desk in Station Hypo. Coffee cold, overnight shift. Rochefort had gone home 2 hours ago. The morning shift was filtering in. Sunday morning, quiet. Almost peaceful. The radio squawked, static. Then a voice. Panicked, breaking protocol. Air raid Pearl Harbor. This is not a drill. Air raid Pearl Harbor. This is not a drill. Lowell stood so fast his chair toppled backward. He ran, through the corridor, out the door, into the morning sun. The sky was full of them. Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers low over the water, Aichi D-3A dive bombers screaming down from altitude, Mitsubishi A-6M fighters, Zeros, strafing. The sound was immense. Engines, machine guns, explosions, the harbor erupting in geysers of water and flame. Lowell stood frozen, watching. The memo he had written 11 days ago played in his mind like a recording. Dawn attack. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, battleship row. No warning, exactly. USS Arizona exploded. 1,000 pounds of bombs penetrated her forward magazine. The fireball rose 1,000 feet into the air. 1,100 men died in 9 seconds. USS Oklahoma capsized. Torpedoes tore open her hull. She rolled over in 12 minutes. 400 men trapped inside. USS West Virginia settled into the mud. USS California listing. USS Nevada making a desperate run for the harbor, mouth-burning, fighting, refusing to die easily. Lowell watched it all, tears streaming down his face. Not from smoke, from rage, from grief, from the simple, terrible knowledge that he had been right, and they hadn't listened. The attack lasted 1 hour and 53 minutes, 2 waves, exactly as he had predicted. When it was over, 2,403 Americans were dead, 21 warships sunk or damaged, 8 battleships, the entire backbone of the Pacific Fleet, destroyed or crippled, 188 aircraft obliterated on the ground. Lowell walked through the wreckage that afternoon. Oil fires burned on the water. Bodies floated in the harbor. Smoke blotted out the sun. A young sailor, maybe 19, sat on the dock, burned, shell-shocked, staring at nothing. Lowell knelt beside him. "Son, are you hurt?" The sailor didn't respond, just stared at the burning Arizona. "My brother's in there," he whispered finally. "We signed up together, wanted to see the world." Lowell had no words, no comfort. Nothing but the weight of the memo dated November 26th. 11 days of warning, ignored. Admiral Kimmel found him that evening. Station Hypo. Lowell sat at his desk, the memo in front of him. The one Washington had dismissed. Kimmel looked 20 years older. His uniform was scorched. His face was gray. "They found your memo, Thad." "I know." Washington's asking questions, how you knew, when you knew, whether you told anyone outside official channels. Lowell looked up.
"Are they accusing me of espionage, sir? They're looking for someone to blame, and you predicted this in writing 11 days ago." The implication hung in the air. If Lowell had known, maybe he had helped. Maybe he had warned the Japanese. Maybe this disaster was his fault. I did my job, sir. I analyzed intelligence. I reported my conclusions. They chose not to believe me. I believed you. Not enough to move the fleet? Kimmel flinched.
That was the truth. Neither man wanted to say. Kimmel had believed, had trusted Lowell's judgment, but Washington had overruled him, told him not to panic, not to disrupt training schedules, not to scatter the fleet based on one intelligence officer's hunch. They're going to relieve me, Kimmel said quietly. Court of inquiry, scapegoat. Someone has to take the fall, and it won't be Washington. You're the best commander this fleet has, sir. Had, past tense. Kimmel straightened, adjusted his uniform, the pride of a career officer holding together by sheer will. They'll come for you next, Thad. Be ready. December 10th, 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor. The Philippines burned. General Blackwell stood in the ruins of Clark Field, 233 aircraft destroyed, most of them on the ground, lined up neatly, wing to wing, easy targets, just like someone had warned him the Japanese had attacked at dawn, December 8th Philippine time, same day as Pearl Harbor. Coordinated, simultaneous strikes across the Pacific, exactly the multi-target offensive Lowell had warned about. Blackwell's aide approached, young captain, Harvard-educated, terrified. Sir, we're cut off. No air cover. Japanese troops landing at Lingayen Gulf. Estimated strength 20,000. We have orders to fall back to Bataan Peninsula. Blackwell stared at the wreckage, at the smoldering hulks of B-17 bombers that were supposed to defend the Philippines, at the twisted metal that represented American air power in the Pacific. He remembered the memo, the one he had dismissed with a single sentence. They hadn't needed a map. They had planned this for years, practiced it, perfected it. And Blackwell had been too arrogant to see it coming. Find me Lowell's original assessment, he said quietly. Sir, the memo, from late November. Find it. The aide found it in the files. Blackwell read it again, every word, every prediction, every warning. All correct. He folded the memo, put it in his pocket. Prepare for retreat to Bataan, he said, and someone send word to Pearl Harbor. Tell Captain Lowell, tell him I'm sorry. But communication with Pearl Harbor was already cut. The message never arrived. Pearl Harbor. December 15th, 1941. Lowell sat in an interrogation room. Navy intelligence. 2 officers he didn't know. A stenographer. A tape recorder. Captain Lowell, how did you know the Japanese would attack Pearl Harbor? I studied their naval doctrine for 15 years. I observed their exercises in Tokyo in 1936. I tracked their carrier movements through signals intelligence. The attack pattern was predictable if you understood their strategy. Predictable, yet no one else predicted it. I wasn't the only one. There were others who saw the threat. We were all ignored. Or you had advanced knowledge from other sources. Lowell went very still. Are you accusing me of treason? We're asking how a lone intelligence officer predicted an attack that surprised the entire United States military establishment. Because I listened, I paid attention, I didn't let arrogance blind me to what the evidence showed. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. They questioned his loyalty, his contacts in Japan, his analysis methods, his personal life, everything. At the end they had nothing, no evidence of espionage, no proof of wrongdoing, just an intelligence officer who had seen what others refused to see. They released him with a warning, stay available for further questioning, don't leave the island, don't speak to the press. Rochefort met him outside. They're investigating you for being right. It's insane. It's politics, Lowell said tiredly. Someone has to be blamed. Better me than the admirals in Washington who ignored the warnings. Kimmel's being relieved, effective immediately. Lowell closed his eyes. A good man, a competent commander, destroyed because he had trusted his superiors in Washington, because he had believed the system would protect him. And me? You're being reassigned. Admiral Nimitz specifically requested you. Nimitz. He's taking over Pacific Fleet, arrives next week. First thing he did was read every intelligence report filed in the last 6 months, including yours. He wants you on his staff. Lowell felt something unfamiliar. Something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Nimitz believes the evidence. Nimitz believes results. You saw what was coming. He wants to know what else you see. December 25th, 1941. Christmas. Admiral Chester Nimitz arrived at Pearl Harbor, white uniform, 4 stars, 60 years old, calm, measured, professional. He toured the wreckage, walked among the burned-out ships, studied the damage, asked questions, listened to answers. Then he called a meeting, all senior staff, intelligence, operations, communications. Lowell attended, sat in the back, prepared to be ignored again. Nimitz stood at the front of the room, no podium, no notes, just a man with authority earned through decades of competent service. Gentlemen, I've read the after-action reports. I've reviewed the intelligence assessments. I've studied Captain Lowell's memo from November 26th. The room went silent. Captain Lowell predicted this attack in detail. Timing, method, target. He was ignored. Men died as a result. That will not happen again. He looked directly at Lowell. Captain, I'm assigning you to my personal staff. Intelligence analysis. I want your assessments on Japanese capabilities, intentions, and likely next moves. And unlike my predecessors, I will listen. Lowell stood. Sir, with respect, my last prediction cost me my credibility. The intelligence community thinks I'm either a traitor or a paranoid alarmist. I think you're a man who saw clearly when it mattered. And I need people who see clearly, Captain, not people who are popular. Nimitz turned to the rest of the room. We lost this round. We were arrogant. We underestimated the enemy. We ignored our own intelligence officers. That changes now. From this point forward, we fight smart. We use every advantage. We listen to the people who know what they're talking about. He paused. Captain Lowell, what's your assessment of Japanese next moves? Lowell stepped forward. For the first time in months, someone was asking. Someone was listening. Sir, they'll consolidate their gains. Philippines, Wake Island, Guam. They'll seize the Dutch East Indies for oil. Singapore for British naval power. They're building a defensive perimeter across the Pacific. And after that, they'll overextend. Their production capacity can't match ours. Their strategy depends on us accepting the fait accompli, negotiating peace, letting them keep their conquests. Will we? No, sir, which means eventually they'll have to defend that perimeter against American industrial power. And when they do, we'll find the weak point, we'll break it, and we'll destroy them. Nimitz nodded slowly. How long? 6 months, sir, maybe a year. They'll run wild for 6 months, then we'll have our chance, if we're ready. If we're smart, if we trust intelligence instead of assumptions. The room was absolutely silent. Nimitz extended his hand. Welcome to the staff, Captain. Let's make sure we're ready. Lowell shook it, felt the weight lift slightly. Not forgiveness, not vindication, not yet, but a chance to be heard when it mattered, a chance to win. The prophet had warned them. They called him traitor. The prophet had been right. They called him paranoid. Now the prophet would have one more chance, if anyone was willing to listen. January 1942. The war news was unrelenting, all bad. A cascade of American defeats that seemed to prove everything the Japanese had believed about Western weakness. Wake Island fell on December 23rd. Tiny garrison, Marines and civilian contractors fought heroically, died anyway. 500 men against overwhelming force. Guam fell in hours. No chance, no hope, just surrender. Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day. British forces, humiliated, captured. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, impregnable fortress, 85,000 Allied troops. Surrendered to 30,000 Japanese on February 15th, the largest capitulation in British military history. The Philippines held on, barely. General Blackwell and 75,000 American and Filipino troops trapped on the Bataan Peninsula, starving, diseased, fighting a delaying action against inevitable defeat. In Washington, panic set in. In London, despair. In Tokyo, celebration. The Japanese war plan was working perfectly, better than perfectly. They had predicted heavy losses in the first 6 months. Actual losses were negligible. But in Pearl Harbor, in a windowless basement room beneath the naval headquarters, Captain Thaddeus Lowell worked. Station Hypo, the code-breaking unit, 15 officers, 30 enlisted men, working around the clock, 3 shifts, 8-hour rotations that usually ran to 12 or 14 because the work never stopped and sleep felt like betrayal when men were dying. Lieutenant Cornelius Rochefort ran the operation. 35 years old, genius with patterns, could see structure in chaos, could find meaning in gibberish. The Japanese naval code was designated JN25, 25 variations, 50,000 possible code groups, changed regularly, maddeningly complex, and absolutely vital because if they could break the code, they could read Japanese naval communications, know where their ships were going, what they were planning, when they would strike. Lowell worked the linguistic side, Rochefort handled the mathematics. Together, slowly, painfully, they began to crack it. Nimitz came down personally, weekly visits, checking progress, offering encouragement, never pressuring, just present, listening. "How close are we?" he asked one evening in late January. Rochefort looked up from worksheets covered in symbols and numbers, eyes red, hands shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. "We can break maybe 10% of their traffic, sir, enough to get fragments, location names, ship types, nothing complete." "Is 10% enough?" Lowell answered. "Depends on the message, sir. If we intercept something about a major operation, 10% might tell us where and when. But we could also miss it entirely if the key code groups are in the 90% we can't read." Nimitz nodded, turned to leave, paused. "Keep working. I have a feeling we're going to need this sooner than later." He was right. March 1942. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday, unseasonably warm, Hawaii weather doing what it always did, ignoring the fact that the world was at war. Rochefort burst into Lowell's office. No knock, no preamble. "We got it. Partial break on the new variant." Lowell stood, followed him to the main workroom. A dozen analysts hunched over desks, worksheets, code books, frequency charts. On the central table, Rochefort spread out the intercepts from the past 48 hours, Japanese naval communications, encrypted, but patterns emerging through the cipher like shapes through fog. "Look at this," Rochefort pointed. Same designator repeated 47 times across multiple messages, different commands, different fleet elements, all referencing the same thing. Lowell studied the intercepts. The designator was 2 characters, 2 Roman letters used as shorthand within the Japanese code, AF. "A target designation," Lowell said quietly. "Has to be. Too consistent, too widespread. They're planning something big. And whatever it is, it's focused on AF. Where's AF? That's the problem. We don't know." They worked for 6 days straight, cross-referencing every mention of AF, building a frequency chart, mapping the communications traffic, trying to triangulate from which commands were discussing it most. Pacific Fleet Intelligence thought it was the Aleutians, Alaska, cold, remote, strategic value debatable but possible. Washington thought it was Fiji, South Pacific, cutting the supply line to Australia. Lowell thought they were both wrong. He sat alone one night, 3 in the morning, everyone else asleep or pretending to sleep at their desks. He stared at the map on the wall. Pacific Ocean, vast, blue, dotted with islands. The Japanese had seized a defensive perimeter. From the Aleutians in the north to the Gilberts in the south, New Guinea to Burma, a vast ring of conquered territory. But there was a gap, one point in that ring that threatened everything, one American base that could project power into the heart of their defensive zone. Midway Island, 2 square miles of coral and sand, middle of nowhere, except it had a runway, and it was only 1,300 miles from Pearl Harbor. And Japanese carriers operating from Midway could cut off Hawaii entirely. If I were planning the next move, Lowell thought I would take Midway. He stood, walked to Rochefort's desk, shook him awake. I know what AF is. Rochefort blinked, sat up. What? Midway. It has to be Midway. Based on what? Strategic logic. They need to eliminate our last forward base. Midway threatens their entire defensive perimeter. If they take it, Hawaii is isolated. The West Coast is vulnerable. It's the next logical objective. Rochefort was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Makes sense, but Washington won't believe strategic logic. They need proof. Then we give them proof. Lowell outlined the plan. Simple, elegant, dangerous if it failed. They would have Midway send a message, unencrypted, plain language, reporting a problem with their water distillation plant, mechanical breakdown, fresh water shortage. If AF was Midway, Japanese intelligence would intercept the message, and they would report it to their fleet in their own encrypted communications. If they saw a Japanese message saying AF reports water shortage, they would have proof. Nimitz approved it, personally. Do it, but if this doesn't work, Washington is going to crucify both of you for wasting time on a hunch. March 22nd, Midway sent the message. Water distillation plant breakdown, requesting emergency fresh water delivery. Lowell and Rochefort waited, monitoring Japanese traffic, hoping, praying. 2 days later, March 24th, an intercept. Japanese naval communications, encrypted, but they had enough of the code broken to read fragments. Water shortage. Logistics concern. Attack schedule. Rochefort translated it aloud, hands shaking, voice tight with controlled excitement. AF is short of water. This may affect operations. Advise bringing additional water supplies for occupation force.
Disson Lowell closed his eyes, felt relief flood through him like a physical thing. AF is Midway. Rochefort grabbed the phone, called Nimitz directly. Sir, we have confirmation. AF is Midway. They're planning a major operation, and we can read enough of their traffic to predict when.
The intercepts continued through April. More details, more fragments. Lowell and his team worked like archaeologists, reconstructing a complete picture from broken pieces. 4 carriers, definitely 4 carriers, the same ones that had hit Pearl Harbor. Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, Admiral Nagumo commanding, the same admiral who had executed the Pearl Harbor strike. Timing early June, exact date uncertain, but probably the first week. Objective seize Midway. Destroy American carriers if they respond. Establish forward base for operations against Hawaii, supporting operations. Diversionary attack on the Aleutians to split American forces. It was all there, the entire Japanese plan, laid out in intercepted messages that they could now read just well enough to understand. Lowell compiled it into a report, 40 pages, every intercept cited, every conclusion supported by evidence, every assumption clearly labeled as such. He delivered it to Nimitz personally. April 28th, afternoon, Nimitz's office, quiet, secure. Nimitz read it in silence. 40 pages, every word, no skimming. He was a man who understood that details mattered. When he finished, he looked up. You're certain about this? As certain as I can be without having access to Japanese staff meetings, sir. The intercepts are clear. They're planning a major operation against Midway, first week of June. Washington won't believe it. I know. They'll say you're guessing again. They'll say Pearl Harbor was luck. They'll say we should focus on defending the Aleutians or Fiji or wherever the hell else they think makes sense. Lowell said nothing. Nimitz was right. Washington had ignored him before Pearl Harbor. They would ignore him again. But Nimitz set the report down, straightened, met Lowell's eyes. I believe you, Captain. I believed you about Pearl Harbor. I was just a staff officer then, couldn't do anything about it. But I'm in command now, and I'm not ignoring this. He picked up the phone, called his operations officer. Start pulling together every available carrier, everything we have. I want them ready to deploy by late May, destination classified until further notice. He hung up, turned back to Lowell. We're committing everything to Midway. If this is wrong, we lose the Pacific Fleet. If it's right, we have a chance to ambush them, to hit them before they hit us, to prove that Pearl Harbor was the exception, not the rule. The weight of it settled on Lowell's shoulders, heavier than anything he had carried before. "Sir, I need to be clear. We can't read all their communications, just fragments. There's a margin of error. They could change plans, they could attack earlier or later, they could—" "Captain," Nimitz's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I understand uncertainty. I understand risk. But I also understand that doing nothing is the greatest risk of all. You've given me intelligence, actionable intelligence. That's all any commander can ask for." He stood, extended his hand. "Don't second-guess yourself. You saw clearly when no one else was willing to look. Trust your analysis." Lowell shook his hand, felt the confidence of a superior officer who had decided to bet everything on his judgment, and felt the terror of knowing that if he was wrong, thousands would die. Again, May 1942. Lowell worked obsessively, refining the analysis, tracking every new intercept, building a more complete picture of the Japanese plan. The details accumulated. 4 carriers approaching from the northwest, screened by battleships and cruisers, supported by submarines. First wave, approximately 108 aircraft. Objectives: suppress Midway's defenses, destroy runways, eliminate air threat. Second wave, approximately 89 aircraft. Held in reserve for American carriers if they appeared. Total Japanese striking power, 197 aircraft, plus support elements. American strength, 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown if they could get her repaired in time. She had been badly damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea. 3 months of repairs needed. They had 72 hours to do it. The odds were not favorable. 4 Japanese carriers versus 3 American. More aircraft, more experience, better pilots. But the Americans had one advantage the Japanese didn't know about. They knew the Japanese were coming. Lowell worked with Nimitz's staff, planning the ambush, where to position the carriers, when to launch the strike, how to maximize surprise. May 20th, Nimitz called a full staff meeting. Operational commanders, intelligence officers, aviation specialists, everyone who needed to know. Lowell stood at the front of the room, a map behind him, Pacific Ocean. Midway marked clearly. "Gentlemen, based on signals intelligence, we have determined that the Japanese will attack Midway Island in the first week of June. Most likely date June 4th, time dawn. Force composition: 4 fleet carriers under Admiral Nagumo, screened by battleships and cruisers. Objective: seize Midway and draw out our carriers for a decisive engagement." Murmurs around the room, some skeptical, some calculating, some simply terrified. A captain from Battleship Division spoke up. "How confident are you in this intelligence?" Lowell met his eyes. "We've broken approximately 15% of their naval code, enough to read fragments of their communications. The pattern is consistent across multiple intercepts from multiple commands. They're planning a major operation. Target designation AF. We've confirmed AF is Midway. The timing matches their operational patterns. The force composition matches their carrier doctrine."
No, 15%, so 85% of their communications we can't read. Correct. Then you could be wrong. I could be, but I wasn't wrong about Pearl Harbor. I wasn't wrong about the Philippines, and the evidence for this is stronger than either of those. Silence. Nimitz stood. "Captain Lowell's intelligence has been reviewed by my staff. I find it credible. We will position our carriers northeast of Midway. We will wait for the Japanese to commit to their attack. And when they do, when their aircraft are attacking Midway and their carriers are vulnerable, we will strike." He looked around the room. 4 stars, absolute authority, absolute responsibility. "This is not a suggestion. This is an order. We sail May 28th. Radio silence from that point forward. If the Japanese discover we know their plans, they'll abort. Surprise is our only advantage. We will not squander it." The meeting ended.
Officers filed out. Lowell remained, staring at the map, at the vast blue Pacific, at the tiny dot that was Midway. Rochefort approached. "You look like a man about to be hanged. If this fails, it'll feel like it." "It won't fail. I've checked your analysis. I've reviewed every intercept. The evidence is solid." "Solid is not certain. In intelligence work, solid is as good as it gets." Lowell nodded, but the fear remained. The same fear he had felt in November when he had written the memo about Pearl Harbor, the fear of being right, the fear of not being believed, the fear of people dying because someone had to make a decision based on incomplete information. "Thad," Rochefort's voice was quiet, serious. "You gave them the best intelligence analysis anyone could have given. What they do with it is not your responsibility. If I'm wrong, Cornelius, we lose 3 carriers, maybe the whole Pacific Fleet. If you're right, we win the war's first major victory, May 28th, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, USS Yorktown, 3 carriers, 233 aircraft total, escorted by cruisers and destroyers. They sailed from Pearl Harbor in early morning, gray sky, calm sea, no fanfare, no crowds, just men going to war." Lowell watched from the dock. He wasn't going. Intelligence officers didn't go to battle. They stayed behind, analyzed, reported, waited. But Admiral Kimmel was going. 59 years old, civilian clothes, no uniform, no authority, just an observer. Nimitz had arranged it personally, given the man who had been blamed for Pearl Harbor a chance to see vindication, or disaster. Kimmel found Lowell on the dock. "You staying behind?" "Not my place to be there, sir." "The hell it isn't. This is your battle, your intelligence, your analysis." "I'm just the messenger. You're the reason we have a chance." Kimmel gripped his shoulder. "Be proud of that. Whatever happens." The carriers steamed out of the harbor into the open Pacific, toward an island most Americans had never heard of. Lowell returned to Station Hypo. Back to the intercepts, the codes. The endless work of trying to read an enemy's mind through fragments of encrypted messages. June 1st, new intercepts. Japanese carriers departed home waters, on schedule, moving east. June 2nd, more traffic, increased volume, orders to submarine screens, updates to air groups, final preparations. June 3rd, almost nothing, radio silence. The Japanese carriers had gone quiet. Standard procedure before major operations. They had learned it from their own exercises. Lowell had watched them practice it in Tokyo in 1936. He plotted their estimated position. Northwest of Midway, approximately 200 miles. Closing? Preparing for dawn launch. Everything was happening exactly as predicted. And he felt no satisfaction, just dread, because predictions were easy, outcomes were hard, and the next 24 hours would determine whether he was a prophet or a fool. 3 carriers sailed into the Pacific. Lowell's intelligence, Nimitz's gamble, everything riding on fragments of broken code and on whether the prophet had seen clearly or seen ghosts. June 4th, 1942. 4:30 a.m. Hawaii time, 7:00 a.m. Midway time. Lowell sat in Station Hypo. Radio on, monitoring all frequencies, waiting. The first report came at 5:52 a.m. Hawaii time. Many planes heading Midway, bearing 320 distance 150. Midway radar had picked them up. Japanese first wave, just like Lowell had predicted. At 6:16 a.m., Midway under attack. The sound of it came over the radio. Bombs, machine guns, explosions, men shouting. The chaos of battle compressed into crackling static and fragmentary reports. Rochefort stood beside Lowell. Both men silent, listening. The attack lasted approximately 20 minutes. Heavy damage to Midway installations. Runways cratered, buildings burning, but the island was still fighting. Anti-aircraft fire, marine fighters engaging, At 7:05 a.m., the crucial message from the American carriers, launching strike, Enterprise, Hornet, Yorktown, every available dive bomber, torpedo bomber, fighter escort, 156 aircraft heading northwest toward the Japanese carriers. Lowell checked his watch, calculated distances, flight times, fuel consumption. The American aircraft would arrive over the Japanese carriers at approximately 9:30 a.m. Midway time, 7 a.m. Hawaii time. If the carriers were where he predicted, if the Japanese had followed the plan he had reconstructed from intercepts, if nothing had changed, if. He waited. The minutes stretched, longer than hours, time distorting under the weight of consequence. At 7:02 a.m. Hawaii time, a message from Yorktown's torpedo squadron. Enemy carriers sighted, commencing attack. Lowell's hands gripped the edge of the table. At 7:15 a.m., torpedo attack unsuccessful. Heavy losses. The torpedo bombers had gone in low, slow, vulnerable, slaughtered by Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire. 41 aircraft, 35 shot down, Rochefort swore. We're getting massacred. But then, at 7:22 a.m. Hawaii time, 10:22 a.m. Midway time, a different message, different squadron, dive bombers attacking. And then minutes later, the message that changed everything. 2 carriers burning, possibly 3, fires out of control. Lowell stood, stared at the radio, not believing, not daring to believe. At 7:30 a.m., confirmed, 3 Japanese carriers hit. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, massive fires, explosions. Rochefort grabbed Lowell's arm. They're exactly where you said they'd be. But Lowell barely heard him. He was thinking about the dive bombers, about 5 minutes of chaos over Japanese carriers, about bombs hitting flight decks crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed, about explosions, fires, men dying, about consequences. The reports continued through the morning. The 4th Japanese carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterstrike, hit Yorktown, damaged her badly. But American dive bombers found Hiryu in the afternoon, sent her to the bottom with the others. By 6:00 p.m. Hawaii time, it was over. 4 Japanese carriers sunk, the same 4 that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, the pride of the Imperial Navy, destroyed in one day. American losses: 1 carrier, Yorktown, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, 307 men. Japanese losses: 4 carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, over 3,000 men. The decisive victory that would change the course of the Pacific War, and it had happened exactly where Captain Thaddeus Lowell had said it would, exactly when he had said it would, exactly as he had predicted. Nimitz's message arrived at 7:00 p.m. Captain Lowell, your intelligence was precise, your analysis was correct. The Pacific Fleet thanks you. The nation thanks you. Now tell me what comes next. Lowell read the message, read it again, felt something unfamiliar, not vindication, not triumph, just exhaustion, and the knowledge that accurate intelligence didn't bring back the dead. He typed a reply. So recommend continued signals intelligence operations. Japanese will regroup. We must remain vigilant. Respectfully, T. Lowell. Professional, measured, giving nothing away. But Rochefort saw his face. You don't look like a man who just won the war's first major victory. Lowell looked at him. 57 years old, grey, tired, carrying weight he would carry for the rest of his life. I was finally heard, Cornelius. After Pearl Harbor, after the Philippines, after all the warnings they ignored, someone finally listened.
And that's not enough. Lowell was quiet for a moment, thinking about 1,100 men on Arizona, about the sailor who lost his brother, about General Blackwell surrounded on Bataan, about all the people who had died in 6 months of defeats. It's 6 months late, he said finally. Rochefort had no answer for that, because Lowell was right. He had always been right. And that was the tragedy. June 5th, 1942. Dawn. The Pacific Ocean burned. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi,
Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, the ships that had devastated Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. Now they were funeral pyres, smoke columns visible for 50 miles, oil slicks spreading across the water, bodies, wreckage, the debris field of a shattered empire. USS Enterprise steamed through the aftermath. Admiral Kimmel stood on the flight deck, civilian clothes, no stars, no authority, just a man who had been blamed for a disaster, witnessing its reversal. Captain Thaddeus Lowell stood beside him, 57 years old, grey at the temples, eyes red from 72 hours without sleep, binoculars in his hands, scanning the horizon. 4 carriers, Kimmel said quietly. You called all 4? Yes, sir. Their position, their timing, their strength, all of it, exactly as you predicted. Lowell lowered the binoculars. The smoke on the horizon was real, tangible, proof that intelligence work, when done correctly and when people listened, could change history. If they had listened in November, Lowell said quietly. If Washington had believed the Pearl Harbor warning, those 4 carriers would have been caught in port, or scattered, or on alert. None of this would have been necessary. You can't think like that, Thad. How else should I think? I've been seeing this clearly since 1936, when I watched them practice this exact doctrine in Tokyo, and nobody listened until the bodies were already floating in the harbor. A sailor approached, young, maybe 20, saluted Kimmel out of habit, then caught himself. No rank to salute anymore. Begging your pardon, sirs, Admiral Nimitz wants Captain Lowell on the radio. Lowell followed the sailor below decks. Communications room. Radio operator handed him the headset. Captain Lowell, Nimitz's voice crackled through the static, calm, measured. The voice of a man who had just won the most important naval battle of the war. Captain, preliminary battle damage assessment is complete. 4 enemy carriers confirmed sunk, 1 heavy cruiser, estimated 3,000 enemy casualties. Our losses: Yorktown and 1 destroyer, 307 men. These numbers are classified until we can verify through multiple sources. Understood, sir. The intelligence you provided was decisive. Without knowing their position, their timing, their strength, we would have been fighting blind, possibly defeated, certainly bloodied far worse than we were. Lowell said nothing. What was there to say? Nimitz continued. I'm recommending you for promotion to Rear Admiral, and for the Distinguished Service Medal. Your analysis changed the course of this war. Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but nothing, Captain. You did your job. You did it superbly. You were right when everyone else was wrong. That deserves acknowledgement. The connection crackled. Bad atmospheric conditions, or maybe just the universe reminding them that clarity was always temporary. There's something else, Nimitz said. We've intercepted Japanese damage reports. They're trying to cover up the extent of their losses, telling Tokyo that only 2 carriers were damaged, not sunk. They're hiding the truth from their own high command. Lowell thought about that. An empire built on the belief in spiritual superiority, in Yamato Damashi, in the inevitability of Japanese victory, confronted with catastrophic material defeat, and choosing to lie about it rather than adapt. They can't hide 4 missing carriers forever, sir. No, but they'll try, which means they'll continue to operate under false assumptions, which means more opportunities for us. Or more desperate gambles, sir. Cornered animals are dangerous. So are prophets who finally found someone to listen, Captain. You proved that. The transmission ended. Lowell handed back the headset, climbed back to the deck, found Kimmel still there, still staring at the smoke. They're recommending me for promotion, Lowell said. You earned it. Did I just finally find someone willing to listen? Kimmel was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, softly. The words of a man who had lost everything and was trying to find meaning in the wreckage. I listened, Thad. I believed you about Pearl Harbor. I told Washington your analysis was credible. I requested permission to disperse the fleet, and they overruled me, told me I was being alarmist, told me not to panic based on one intelligence officer's hunch. He turned, met Lowell's eyes. I lost my command because I believed you, my reputation, my career, everything. And you know what the worst part is? What, sir? You were right, about all of it. And I wasn't strong enough to act on it without permission from Washington. I should have dispersed the fleet anyway, should have put everything on alert, should have told Washington to go to hell and protected my men.
You would have been court-martialed. Better that than what happened. Better disgrace with honor than honor without action. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of burning oil, the scent of victory and tragedy mixed together until you couldn't tell which was which. Bataan, Peninsula, Philippines, June 8, 1942, 4 days after Midway. The news arrived slowly in the prisoner of war camps, whispered between prisoners, smuggled in by Filipino civilians who risked execution to share information. Fragments at first, then more details, then the impossible truth. 4 Japanese carriers sunk. General Augustus Blackwell sat in the dirt, 57 years old, 30 pounds lighter than he had been in December. Dysentery, malaria, the diseases that killed more prisoners than Japanese brutality. The young captain, who had been his aide in Manila, knelt beside him, skeletal, eyes hollow, but alive. Sir, the rumors confirmed. Multiple sources, Midway, American victory, 4 Jap carriers destroyed. Blackwell stared at nothing. His B-17 bombers had been destroyed on the ground, December 8th, lined up neatly, wing to wing, easy targets, exactly like someone had warned him they would be. Do we know which carriers? Blackwell's voice was hoarse, throat damaged from screaming orders during the Bataan defense, orders that had accomplished nothing except getting good men killed. Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, the same ones that hit us, sir. The same ones, the Pearl Harbor strike force, the carriers that had destroyed American air power across the Pacific, now destroyed themselves. How did we do it? Intelligence, sir, code breaking. They knew the Japs were coming, knew exactly where and when, set an ambush. Intelligence, Lowell's specialty, the thing Blackwell had dismissed as paranoid fantasy. Another prisoner approached. Marine Colonel, Bataan defender. Respect earned through shared suffering. General, is it true about Midway? Apparently. We won. We won. The colonel sat down hard, started laughing. Not humor, something closer to hysteria, relief, hope. The first good news in 6 months of unrelenting disaster. How? The colonel asked her. How did we pull it off? Blackwell pulled the folded paper from his pocket. He had carried it through the retreat to Bataan, through the surrender, through the death march, through everything. Lowell's memo, dated November 26, 1941. The paper was filthy, sweat-stained, torn at the edges, but the words were still legible. We listened to someone we should have listened to 6 months earlier. He handed the memo to the colonel, watched him read it, watched understanding dawn. He predicted Pearl Harbor. Everything. Time, method, targets. I called him insane. Said the Japanese couldn't organize a competent attack if we gave them a map. The colonel read it again, then looked at Blackwell. And this same intelligence officer? Probably the one who predicted Midway, yes. Silence. The kind that falls when men realize that disasters are usually preventable and that the real enemy is often incompetence and arrogance masquerading as authority. Blackwell took the memo back, folded it carefully, returned it to his pocket. When this is over, he said quietly, if I survive, I'm going to find Captain Lowell, and I'm going to apologize for everything. The Marine Colonel nodded. You think we'll make it out of here, sir? Blackwell looked around. Barbed wire, guard towers, men dying of starvation and disease. The Japanese treated prisoners with contempt. Less than human, barely worth the rice to feed them. Midway means we have a chance. Before that, I thought the war was lost, thought we'd spend the rest of our lives in these camps. But if we can destroy 4 carriers in one battle, we can win. It'll take years, but we can win. How long, sir? Blackwell did the math. American industrial capacity, shipbuilding rates, the time needed to build and train a fleet large enough to fight across the Pacific. 3 years, maybe 4, if we're lucky.
He was wrong. It would take 3 years and 2 months, and Augustus Blackwell would not live to see it. Malaria would kill him in August 1944, 2 weeks before Manila was liberated. But he died believing that America would win, because an intelligence officer he had once dismissed as paranoid had seen clearly all along. Pearl Harbor, June 10, 1942. Lowell returned to Station Hypo. The code-breaking never stopped. Midway was a victory, a crucial victory, but not the end, just the beginning of what would be a long, brutal campaign. Rochefort met him at the door. "Admiral's looking for you, big brass from Washington. Awards ceremony." "I don't want an awards ceremony." "Doesn't matter what you want. Nimitz wants to make a statement that intelligence wins wars, that listening to experts matters. You're the symbol." The ceremony was small. Security concerns. Can't let the Japanese know that their codes had been broken. Can't reveal the source of American intelligence advantage. 30 officers, Station Hypo staff, Nimitz, a few senior commanders. Lowell stood at attention, uniform pressed, medals he had earned over 30 years of service, about to receive one more. Nimitz read the citation. "For exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services to the government of the United States as intelligence officer on the staff of the Commander-in-Chief United States Pacific Fleet." Captain Lowell's brilliant analysis of enemy capabilities and intentions provided the intelligence foundation for the decisive American victory at Midway. His accurate assessment of enemy strength, timing, and objectives enabled the Pacific Fleet to achieve tactical surprise and strategic success. His dedication to duty and exceptional professional skill reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Naval Service. Nimitz pinned the Distinguished Service Medal to Lowell's uniform, shook his hand, leaned in close enough that only Lowell could hear. "You saved the Pacific Fleet, Captain. Don't ever doubt that." The ceremony ended. Officers congratulated him, shook his hand, thanked him. The same officers who had been skeptical 6 months ago, the same ones who had whispered about him being paranoid, too sympathetic to Japan, too pessimistic. Now they believed. Now, when it no longer mattered whether they believed or not. Lowell returned to his office, closed the door, sat at his desk, stared at the medal. Rochefort knocked, entered without waiting for permission. "You look like a man attending his own funeral." "I was thinking about the men on Arizona." "Don't do that to yourself." 1,100 men, Cornelius, killed in 9 seconds when the magazine exploded. All of them would be alive if anyone had listened. "Stop." Rochefort's voice was sharp. "You did your job. You can't control whether people listen. You can't carry the weight of every decision made above your pay grade. Then who carries it? The people who made those decisions, the admirals in Washington who ignored your warning, the generals who called you paranoid, they carry it, not you." Lowell was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer, pulled out a folder, his personal copy of the November 26 memo. "Do you know what Washington's response was when I warned them about the attack?" "I know. They investigated me for possible espionage, suggested I might have warned the Japanese, that I might be a traitor. And they were wrong. They were terrified that someone had seen clearly when the entire intelligence establishment was blind. Easier to call me a traitor than admit they had failed." Rochefort sat down across from Lowell. 2 men who had broken Japanese codes, who had predicted Midway, who had changed the course of the war. "What are you going to do now?" Rochefort asked. "Keep working, keep analyzing, keep predicting what they'll do next. And if they doubt you again, then I'll keep predicting anyway. Because someone has to. Someone has to be willing to tell uncomfortable truths even when no one wants to hear them." Washington, D.C., June 15, 1942. The Navy Department held a quiet briefing. Very senior officers only, the kind of meeting that never appeared in official records. Subject lessons learned from Midway. An intelligence colonel stood at the front of the room, reading from a classified report. The findings were damning. Captain Thaddeus Lowell submitted detailed warnings about Japanese carrier strike capability in 1936, 1937, 1938, 1940, and 1941. All warnings were dismissed as alarmist. His November 26, 1941 memo specifically predicted an attack on Pearl Harbor within 2 weeks. This warning was not acted upon. Silence in the room. Uncomfortable, heavy. Following the Pearl Harbor attack, Captain Lowell was investigated for possible espionage. No evidence of wrongdoing was found. He was subsequently assigned to Admiral Nimitz's staff, where his signals intelligence analysis correctly predicted the Japanese attack on Midway Island. His assessment proved accurate in all major particulars: target location, timing, and force composition. The colonel paused. Let the implications settle. The question before this committee: why was Captain Lowell's analysis ignored before Pearl Harbor but trusted before Midway? An admiral, 3 stars rising, career political connections, spoke up. Different commanders. Kimmel was overly cautious. Nimitz was willing to take risks. No, sir. The colonel's voice was respectful but firm. The difference was institutional. Before Pearl Harbor, Captain Lowell's warnings contradicted prevailing assumptions about Japanese capability. The intelligence establishment had concluded that Japan lacked the ability to execute a coordinated carrier strike across the Pacific. Captain Lowell's assessment challenged that conclusion. Rather than re-examine their assumptions, senior leadership questioned Captain Lowell's loyalty and competence. Another admiral: are you suggesting this committee ignored accurate intelligence because it was politically inconvenient? I'm suggesting, sir, that we must create institutional mechanisms to ensure that accurate intelligence is heard and acted upon, regardless of whether it confirms or challenges our assumptions. The meeting continued for 3 hours. Recommendations were drafted. Procedures were revised, intelligence protocols were reformed. But the core lesson was simple and brutal: lives were lost because senior leadership refused to believe uncomfortable truths. The report concluded with one sentence that would be classified for 30 years. The Pearl Harbor disaster was not an intelligence failure, it was a failure to act on intelligence. August 1942. Lowell worked, analyzing Japanese communications, predicting their next moves. The war continued. Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands, a grinding campaign of attrition. But something had changed. Commanders listened now. When Lowell said Japanese forces were reinforcing a position, they believed him. When he predicted enemy movements, they adjusted plans accordingly. He had earned credibility the hard way, by seeing clearly when it mattered most. Nimitz called him in regularly. Personal consultations, the admiral treating the intelligence officer as an equal, as someone whose judgment had proven more reliable than conventional wisdom. "What's your assessment of Japanese intentions?" Nimitz asked one afternoon. "They're overextended, sir, trying to defend a perimeter that's too large for their industrial capacity to support. Every island garrison, every naval base, every airfield, it all requires supplies, reinforcements, fuel, and we're cutting their supply lines. How long can they sustain it? Maybe a year, maybe less. They'll start making choices, abandoning outer positions, consolidating closer to Japan. The empire will shrink. And when it shrinks, we push, island by island, cut them off from resources, oil from the East Indies, rubber, rice, everything they need to continue fighting. Eventually, we'll be in a position to strike Japan itself." Nimitz nodded, making notes. Lowell's assessments were no longer theoretical exercises, they were operational planning. "You saw Pearl Harbor coming," Nimitz said quietly. "You saw Midway. Are you seeing this clearly too?" "Yes, sir." No hesitation, no doubt. The confidence of a man who had studied the enemy for 15 years, who understood their strategic thinking, who knew their limitations. "Then, we'll plan accordingly." April 18, 1943. The intercepted message was brief, encrypted, but Rochefort's team had gotten better at breaking Japanese codes, much better. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the commander who had led the attack, he was planning an inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands. Schedule included flight path, timing, aircraft type. Nimitz called Lowell in personally. "We have an opportunity. Yamamoto, We know exactly where he'll be, when he'll be there. We can shoot him down. Lowell studied the intercept. The intelligence was solid. Yamamoto's itinerary, down to the minute. It's real, sir. They're arrogant. They don't believe we've broken their codes. So they're transmitting operational details without adequate security. Then we can kill him. Lowell was quiet for a moment, thinking about Yamamoto, the admiral who had warned his own government that war with America was unwinnable, who had predicted that Japan would run wild for 6 months and then face American industrial power, who had seen clearly and been ignored just like Lowell. Sir, may I speak candidly? Always. Yamamoto is the best strategic mind they have. He understands their limitations. He knows they can't win a long war. If we kill him, they'll replace him with someone less competent, someone who'll make mistakes, someone who'll waste resources on pointless operations. Nimitz considered that. You're saying we should let him live because he's too good. I'm saying we should consider whether killing one admiral is worth potentially revealing that we've broken their codes. If they realize we intercepted Yamamoto's itinerary, they'll change all their ciphers. We'll lose our intelligence advantage. And if we don't act, if we let this opportunity pass, then we continue reading their communications, predicting their moves, winning battles through superior intelligence, like we did at Midway. Nimitz stood, walked to the window, looked out at Pearl Harbor, ships being repaired, new construction, the Pacific Fleet rebuilding. Pacific. I'm going to authorize the mission, he said finally. Yamamoto planned Pearl Harbor. He led the attack. He doesn't get to retire quietly and write his memoirs. Yes, sir. Nimitz turned, met Lowell's eyes. But you're right about the risk. If this compromises our code breaking, the cost will be high. So we make it look like luck, like good reconnaissance. We don't give them any reason to think we read their codes. April 18th, 1943, exactly 1 year after Doolittle's raid on Tokyo. P-38. Lightnings from Guadalcanal intercepted Yamamoto's transport over Bougainville. The admiral who had warned Japan not to fight America died in the jungle. Still gripping his samurai sword, Lowell received the after-action report, read it in his office, felt no satisfaction, just awareness that wars were made of individual deaths, each one a story, each one a consequence of decisions made months or years earlier. Yamamoto had seen clearly about the war, just like Lowell, and both of them had been ignored by the people who mattered. Until it was too late. September 1945. The war ended. Atomic bombs, Soviet invasion of Manchuria, unconditional surrender. Japan, the empire that had believed spiritual superiority would overcome material disadvantage, lay in ruins. 67 cities bombed, 2 atomic strikes, 2 million military dead, hundreds of thousands of civilians. Lowell stood on the deck of USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, September 2nd, 1945. The surrender ceremony, Japanese officials signing documents, formally ending hostilities. He was 60 years old now, 3 more years and grey. The war had aged everyone who lived through it. Admiral Nimitz was there, 4 stars, commander of Pacific forces, the man who had listened when it mattered. General MacArthur presided, theatre commander, political genius, taking credit for everyone's victories. Admiral Kimmel was not there, still disgraced, still blamed for Pearl Harbor. His name not cleared, his reputation not restored. The scapegoat who had believed Lowell and been punished for it. After the ceremony, Lowell found a quiet corner, watched Japanese officials depart, defeated, broken. An empire that had convinced itself of its own invincibility now facing the reality of absolute defeat. A Marine major approached, mid-30s, professional, respectful. Captain Lowell, Major Harrison, Intelligence Staff, I wanted to thank you, sir. Lowell looked at him. For what, Major? For Midway. I was at Guadalcanal, the Canal, Tarawa, Saipan, all of it. We only had a chance because you gave us Midway, 6 months to build, 6 months to train, 6 months to prepare. I didn't fight those battles, Major. Marines did. No, sir. But you gave us the intelligence that made fighting them possible. Without Midway, without breaking their carrier power, we'd still be defending Hawaii, or worse. The Major saluted, left. Lowell stood alone. He thought about Yamamoto, about the Admiral's prediction that Japan would run wild for 6 months, about how accurate that had been. Midway had happened 6 months and 1 day after Pearl Harbor. Both men, Yamamoto and Lowell, had predicted the war's course. Both had been ignored by their own governments. Both had seen clearly. The difference was that Lowell's government had eventually listened. Yamamoto's never did. 1946, retirement, Lowell left the Navy, 30 years of service. 2 wars, more intelligence analysis than any 10 officers combined, final rank captain. The promotion to Rear Admiral had been blocked. Politics. Washington never forgave people for seeing clearly when the establishment was blind. He didn't care. Rank was meaningless. What mattered was whether the work had mattered. He moved to a small house in Virginia, near Arlington, near the cemetery where many of Pearl Harbor's fallen were buried. Rochefort visited, brought a bottle of whiskey. They sat on the porch, watching the sun set. "You ever regret it?" Rochefort asked. "Staying in intelligence?" "You could have commanded ships, made admiral, had the career." "No, not even a little." Lowell was quiet for a moment, thinking about Tokyo in 1936, about the memo in November 1941, about Midway, about all the predictions that had come true and all the people who had died anyway. "I did the work that needed doing, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. They should have listened sooner." "Yes, but they didn't. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility was to provide accurate intelligence. I did that. What they did with it was their choice." Rochefort poured 2 glasses, handed one to Lowell. To the prophets, nobody believed. To the admirals who finally listened. They drank, watched the darkness fall, thought about the war, about the men who died, about the decisions that could have saved them, and about the simple, brutal truth that seeing clearly is never enough. You have to convince people to look. 1970. Lowell sat for an interview, Naval Historical Foundation, preserving stories from World War II before the generation that fought it was gone. The interviewer was young, maybe 30, Vietnam generation, skeptical of authority, interested in how decisions were made during the good war. "Captain Lowell, you predicted Pearl Harbor. How did that feel when it happened anyway?" Lowell thought about the question. 75 years old now. Most of his contemporaries were dead. Nimitz, Rochefort, Kimmel, all gone. "Devastating," he said finally. "I had done everything right. Analysis, documentation, communication through proper channels, and it didn't matter. Men died because the people with authority refused to believe intelligence that contradicted their assumptions. Do you blame them? I understand them. Nobody wants to believe that disaster is imminent. Nobody wants to make difficult decisions based on incomplete information. It's easier to dismiss the warning than to act on it. But you saw clearly?" "Yes. But seeing clearly doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't undo the damage. It just proves that the disaster was preventable." "What about Midway?" "Midway was different." Admiral Nimitz listened. He trusted intelligence. He was willing to bet everything on analysis that might have been wrong. And because he listened, we won. What's the lesson? Lowell was quiet for a long moment, thinking about 30 years of intelligence work, about warnings issued and ignored, about predictions vindicated too late. "The lesson is simple," he said finally. "Listen to people who have spent years studying the problem. Listen to experts who understand the enemy's capabilities and intentions. Don't let arrogance or preconceptions blind you to uncomfortable truths. And if the experts are wrong, then you adjust. But if you never listen to them at all, you guarantee failure. Pearl Harbor happened because we didn't listen. Midway succeeded because we did. The difference between tragedy and triumph is one person willing to hear what they don't want to believe." The interviewer paused, checking notes. Did you ever meet General Blackwell, the Philippines commander? No, he died in a POW camp in 1944, but I heard he carried my memo through the entire ordeal, the one warning about Pearl Harbor. He wanted to apologize for not believing it. Did that vindicate you? No, vindication would have been him believing it in November 1941. His apology doesn't change history, doesn't bring back the men who died. It's just acknowledgement that the warning was real. Is that enough? Lowell looked at the interviewer, young, idealistic, still believing that truth matters. No, he said quietly. It's never enough. The interview ended, the tapes were archived, Lowell's story preserved for historians who would write about the Pacific War decades later. He died in 1976, 81 years old. Quiet funeral, small, family and a few old Navy colleagues. The Distinguished Service Medal was buried with him, along with a copy of his November 26, 1941 memo. The one that had predicted everything. The one that nobody had believed. NSA headquarters, Fort Meade, Maryland. The building houses the nation's signals intelligence operations, code breaking, communications monitoring, the modern version of what Lowell and Rochefort did in Station Hypo 80 years ago. One wing is named the Thaddeus Lowell Intelligence Center. New analysts are trained there. They learn about codes, about patterns, about finding meaning in chaos, and they learn about Captain Thaddeus Lowell, the intelligence officer who predicted Pearl Harbor and was ignored, who predicted Midway and was believed, who spent 30 years providing accurate analysis and died without ever making admiral. The instructors tell his story as a case study, as a warning. Intelligence work is not about being right, they teach. It's about being believed. Captain Lowell saw clearly about Pearl Harbor. Men died because nobody listened. He saw clearly about Midway. Thousands of lives were saved because someone did. The lesson? Provide accurate intelligence, document your analysis, communicate clearly, but understand that your job doesn't end when you submit the report. Your job is to convince decision-makers to act. Captain Lowell did everything correctly, and Pearl Harbor still happened. Remember that, and do better. The class ends. Young analysts file out, heading to their workstations, to their computers and algorithms and modern code-breaking tools that Lowell could never have imagined. One analyst pauses at the doorway, looks back at the photograph on the wall, black and white, faded. Taken June 5th, 1942. Captain Thaddeus Lowell, 57 years old, standing on the deck of USS Enterprise, watching smoke rise from the horizon. 4 Japanese carriers burning. The decisive victory, the vindication. But his face shows none of that, just exhaustion and grief. For the men who would still be alive if someone had listened 11 days sooner. The analyst stares at that face and understands. Intelligence work is not about being right. It's about being believed before it's too late.